Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 9, Prahlad pacifies the Lord with prayers, text number 45. Yan mai tunadi grihamedi sakam hutnitucham. Kandu yanena karayor ivaduka dukam. Tripyanti neha kripana bahudukka bhaja. Kandu divan manasijam vishahet diraha. Yanmai tunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham. Kandu yenena karyor ivaduka dukam. Tripyanti neha kripana bahudukka bhaja. Kandu divan manasijam vishahet diraha. Medi sukham nitucham. Yanena koryor ivaduka dukam. Kripyanti neha kripana bahudukka bhaja. Kandu divan mansijam vishahet diraha. Yanmai tunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham. Kandu yanena karyor ivaduka dukam. Kripyanti neha nabhubhata. Kandu divad manasijam vishahet diraha. Mai tunadi grihamedi sukham hitucha. Kandu yanena karyor ivaduka dukam. Tripyanti neha kripana bahudukka bhaja. Kandu divan manasijam vishahet diraha. Mataji. Yanmai tunedi grihamedi sukham hiducha. Kandu dinena karyor ivaduka dukam. Tripyanti neha kripana bahudukka bhajam. Kandu divan manasijam vishahet diraha. Yet that which is meant for material sense gratification. Maituna adi, represented by talking of sex, reading sexual literature, or enjoying sex life at home or outside, as in a club. Grihamedi sukham, all types of material happiness based on attachment to family, society, friendship, etc. Karayo, He indeed tucham insignificant, kanduyanena with the itching, karayo of the two hands to relieve the itching, eva like dukkha dukkam different types of unhappiness into which one is put after such itching sense gratification. Triptyanti becomes satisfied. Na never. Iha immaterial sense gratification. Kripana the foolish persons. Bahudukabhaja subjected to various types of material unhappiness. Kandutivat if one can learn from such itching. Manasijam which is simply a mental concoction. Actually, there is no happiness. Vishaheta and tolerates such itching. Dhira, he can become a most perfect sober person. Translation purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedis, so-called grihastas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is the source of distress. The kripanas, the fools, who are just the opposite of brahmanas, are not satisfied with repeated sensuous enjoyment. They are those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. Purport. Materialists think that sexual indulgence is the greatest happiness in the material world, and therefore they make elaborate plans to satisfy their senses, especially the genitals. This is generally found everywhere, and specifically found in the Western world, where there are regular arrangements to satisfy sex life in different ways. Actually, however, this has not made anyone happy. Even the hippies, who have given up all the materialistic comforts of their fathers and grandfathers, cannot give up the sensational happiness of sex life. Such persons are described here as kripanas, misers. The human form of life is a great asset, for in this life one can fulfill the goal of existence. Unfortunately, however, because of lack of education and culture, people are victimized by the false happiness of sex life. Prahlad Maharaj therefore advises one not to be misled by the civilization of sense gratification, and especially not by sex life. Rather, one should be sober, avoid sense gratification, and be Krishna conscious. The lusty person who is compared to a foolish miser never gets happiness by sense gratification. The influence of material nature is very difficult to surpass. But as stated by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 7:14, Mam eva ye prapadante, mayam etam tarantite. If one voluntarily submits to the lotus feet of Krishna, he can be saved very easily. In reference to the low-grade happiness of sex life, Jamunacharya says in this connection, Yadavade mama chaita Krishna padaravinde nava navarasa damanyuyatam rantumasit tadavade bhatanari sangame smaryamane bhavati mukha vikarashustu nistivanam cha. Since I've been engaged in the transcendent loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lips curl with this taste. Jamunacharya had formerly been a great king would enjoy sexual happiness in various ways, but since he later engaged himself in the service of the Lord, he enjoyed spiritual bliss and hated to think of sex life. His sensual thoughts came to him, he would spit with disgust. Yanmai tunadi griha medi sukham hitucham kanduyanena karyor ivaduka dukam tripyanti neha kripana bahubduka bhaja kanduriyo kandutivan mansijam vichaheta. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedis, so-called grihastas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually is a source of distress. The kripanas, the fools, who are just the opposite of brahmanas, are not satisfied in repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the suffering of fools and rascals. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasai Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shrinivari Paskatya De Siddharane. Might as well clap a few times, wake everyone up. Clap for the waking. Everyone clap. Clap that we're all here, awake. So, Prabhupada once mentioned that if we become dhira, then 50% of our business is done. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said that we're not this body. Now, this is something we can meditate on. The fact that the body's changing, but we're not changing. But that's not the end of the story, because it's fact whether we realize it or not. We're still eternal whether we believe it or not. But we're still in Maya, under the influence of the illusory energy, whether we believe it or not. Even when we believe we're eternal, it doesn't do us very much good if we're still conditioned. Therefore, Krishna follows that statement by Matra Sparsha Sukhandeya Shitoshna Sukadukada Agama Payano Nityastam Tatiksha Svabharata. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who's not disturbed by happiness and stress. I think he says that. Disturbed? Happiness, stress. That's the next verse. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and the disappearance in due course of time are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O son of Bharata, and one should tolerate them without being disturbed. So Krishna's next instruction is tolerance. Now, tolerance doesn't mean that someone calls me a bad name and I just tolerate. That's also there, but ultimately the ultimate tolerance is not to become distracted by sense gratification, of which when we retaliate against someone who's criticizing us, that's another aspect of profit, adoration, and distinction. We want to be adored, we want profit, we want distinction. And if someone interferes with us, then we become disturbed. So that's subtle sense gratification. But also there's gross sense gratification. So we should wake up. And not become disturbed by all these different modes of material nature that are constantly influencing us. Because if we're being influenced by them, then our intelligence is being taken away by the illusory energy, And not only we won't realize Krishna, but we won't even realize who we are. And if we don't realize who we are, we don't realize who Krishna is, then we have to come back. Mrityu samsara vartmane. Back to the cycle of birth and death. Ashwadadana purusha dharma syasya parantapa aprapyamam nivartante mrityu samsara vartmane. That those who are not faithful to this path cannot obtain me, and therefore they come back to repeated birth and death. So, here is a division. It's either sex life or Krishna. That's our choice. We have to make that choice. And once we choose sex life, then there's so many other things that follow. Therefore, it is said that people have hundreds and thousands of topics of hearing. Because Pariksha Maharaj was about to leave his body. He could have asked so many questions, like, do you know of a good Ayurvedic doctor who knows how to deal with snake bites? Any medicine that you know? No, he didn't ask those questions. He asked, what is the duty of a person who's about to die? And Shukadeva Goswami appreciated that question, said it's Varyan, it's glorious. Now, generally people ask millions of other questions, and whether they're about eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and working hard to get the means to eat, sleep, mate, and defend. The problem with that is deha patya kala tradishu atma sanyeshva satsupi tesham pramato nidanam pashan napi napashati. The problem is that what are we actually the most worried about? We're worried about dying. Even family life, to reproduce, is a sense of trying to continue our existence vicariously through our descendants. Of course, in the Vedic culture, by performance of sacrifice, and one could go to the heavenly planets, and one could stay there as long as one's ancestors also performed the Pitri Yagya. So that can go on for a long time. So every child, every male child especially, has the obligation to grow up and get married and perform Pitri Yagya so that their ancestors could remain in the heavenly planets. There's something like, and that way their children would grow up and perpetually the sacrifice would go on, except that usually Kali Yuga always comes up and someone stops performing the sacrifice, and then everyone falls down into Kali Yuga. All those Pitri Loka residents, Pitri Loka gets vacated, usually in Kali Yuga. Little sign, sorry, come back for Satya Yuga. We'll try and come back for Satya. Therefore, Vedic culture is meant to learn how to tolerate, especially sex life, which is, says here is kandudivat manusijam vishaheta dira. It's a concoction that this is going to bring us any more happiness than it did the last time. It may be the maximum happiness, and there's a kind of happiness when you have a scratch, you keep on scratching it, and then finally it doesn't itch anymore. There's a kind of alleviation. Unfortunately, as soon as you stop scratching, then it gets even worse. And then you think, well, there's even a better opportunity. But then Prabhupada said, after some time you scratch so much, the skin wears out, and all you got is blood. Therefore, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is constantly reminding us about this tolerance. Karma krodha vimuktanam yatinam yatichetasam abhito brahmaniravanam vartate viditaratmanaha. Those who are free from desire, one who can tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is a yogi and he is liberated in this world. Shaknoti yaiva yakshodum praksharira vimokshanat kama krodo bhavan vegan vimukta sa sukhi nara. But the whole thing is not just tolerate. That would be a useless waste of time. It is just tolerating. Sometimes one is not able to tolerate it anymore. Like Vishwamrita Muni, trying to become free, or actually trying to become a Brahmin, sitting and meditating for a long period of time. And I guess he must have been established in some kind of peaceful position. But then when Indra sent Menaka with her ankle bells, he didn't take much to disturb him and take him off the path of self-realization for 100 years. When he opened his eyes just to take a peek at Menaka, and then, of course, the rest was history. So we shouldn't be so confident that we're so powerful that we're not disturbed by these things at all. If he had been a great sage like Vishwamrita Muni, after 60,000 years of meditation, just by hearing ankle bells, can become disturbed. What about our poor selves? The worst thing is, think, well, I'm a brahmachari. No one's going to disturb me. As I said before, Rajneesh was a famous brahmachari in India, and he became very proud of being a brahmachari and put an article in all the major newspapers in India, challenging any woman to have him fall down. So one famous prostitute in India came and accepted the challenge, spent the night with Rajneesh, and the next day Rajneesh wrote an article, Liberation Through Sex. So the only way of actually avoiding the entanglement, as Krishna says, is the process. And ultimately the process, Krishna says, we have to practice tolerance, yes, but at the same time practice Krishna consciousness. Prarishat priyam prapya no dvijat prapyacha priyam stira buddhira samudo brahmani stitaha. A person who's not rejoices when he obtains something pleasant, nor laments when he obtains something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, unbewildered, and who knows the signs of God, is said to be situated in transcendence. So we have to come to transcendence, which means we have to become liberated from our material ideas. So that takes some practice. While we're performing Krishna consciousness, we also have to give up our lamentation voluntarily and our unnecessarily hankering for things. We have to become equal in happiness and distress. When everything's going our way, we shouldn't become overwhelmed that now I found the secret, and from now on my life is going to be completely smooth and sailing. Nothing's going to interfere with my exalted position. And at the same time, we have to not become disturbed when things aren't going our way. Oh, it's horrible. This world is miserable. It's unfair. I'm such a nice person. I'm a good devotee. Why is Krishna so unkind to put me in these difficulties? Something's wrong with Krishna or the process or both. So one has to learn how to tolerate and become self-intelligent. Not go around asking everyone questions. Why is it happening to me? And accepting no answer from anyone. Be a perpetual seeker. Why God is unfair to me, particularly. No, the answer is, Payas Parshevid Satmatma Vindat Miniyat Sukham Sa Brahma Yoga Yuktatma Sukhamakshayam Ashnute. Such a person is situated in transcendence and self-control. Actually, person is not attracted by material sense objects or external objects. Payas Parshevid Satmatma Vindat Miniyat Sukham, who experiences pleasure within. Such a person, I think it starts with such a person, is not attracted to material sense objects or external objects, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure from within. In this way, the self-realized soul enjoys unlimited happiness because he concentrates on the Supreme. So that's it. We have to concentrate our minds on Krishna, that's all. Which means we have to learn how to concentrate our minds. That's why we have this sadhana bhakti. That's why we're having these programs. That's why we chant Hare Krishna. Why are we doing the whole thing? Just to try to concentrate our minds upon Krishna and stay awake in order to do so. It was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was falling asleep. He didn't want to fall off the altar. He didn't like my class. So we're trying to concentrate the mind upon Krishna. And the more we can do that, the more we can learn how to do it, which is an art in itself, how to focus one's attention and give one's love to Krishna. Just concentrating the mind upon Krishna is not going to be sufficient. As if you're trying to, it's the most horrible thing you could possibly do in the world, the most torturous thing to think about Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Oh, it's so painful thinking about Krishna. I can't take it anymore. Maya, please help me. I'm torturing myself thinking about Krishna. No one also has to have a positive attitude. One should expect, not only when I concentrate my mind upon Krishna, but I should try to give my love and devotion to Krishna also. That Krishna is all attractive. So chant Hare Krishna, pay attention, and try to be transcendently happy. Understanding that there's no need for being in anxiety because I'm eternal. There's so many miserable things happening, so many horrible things happening in the material world, even in this country, Slovenia, which is supposed to be almost a heavenly planet. Still, things are going wrong here. So we shouldn't be in anxiety. How is it possible? I took birth in such a nice country and things aren't going well. What can I do? Go out and protest or whatever. No, we should learn to tolerate. Tolerate, accept. Not that every time we just tolerate and do nothing. We tolerate our own urges, our own depression, our own misconceptions. We have to tolerate them and add Krishna consciousness to our lives. And that may mean many things we might do. But in Krishna consciousness, focus the attention and then give one's love to Krishna. Then, if one gets sufficient taste in Krishna consciousness, Gataruchi, then one will not be disturbed under any circumstance. When one actually experiences Krishna, one can not only think about Krishna, but experience him by feeling his presence, feeling Krishna, feeling the happiness of being in Krishna consciousness, then one will not be disturbed or distracted by so many other lesser important things. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasideinam rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishva nivartate. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, it remains fixed in consciousness. None of these verses stand alone. It's not that that's 259. It's not that there are all the other verses before that are all bringing us to the point of experiencing that. Not becoming fixed in consciousness and not becoming disturbed by the lesser allurements, the allurements of lesser types of happiness. All the other verses preceding that verse teach us how to come to that level of consciousness. It's not just a theory, it's a practice, and we have to utilize our body, mind, words, everything that we have, try to utilize it in that practice so that one day we can actually understand what that verse is and experience it. And not become disturbed, or become disturbed less and less and less by the allurements of Maya, not take her so seriously, and take Krishna consciousness more and more seriously, so that Krishna reciprocates and allows us to think about him and everyone else in relationship to him more and more profoundly, more and more deeply, and therefore become more and more enlivened and enlightened to serve Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. So I'll stop there. Any questions? Or I should say, who has the first question?
Hare Krishna. It's an interesting topic. Everyone should be awake now. Usually is awake when this topic is discussed. So here it is mentioned that the sex enjoyment is the highest pleasure in this material world. And we as a living entities, we are hankering for happiness. And you mentioned this higher taste, and there is a process when it is described in the second chapter. This is for those sthita pragya munis, like a symptoms that he has a higher taste, but even he is in a dangerous position. So what for us as sadhakas and neophytes, which we are somewhere in between, so between nishta, where happiness actually is a natural symptom of our spiritual practice. How to survive between until coming to this stage? Because we are hankering for happiness, but
hopefully you're feeling some happiness in the sadhana bhakti. There are different levels of six qualities of sadhana bhakti. Kleshagni, at least in sadhana bhakti, in the beginning, the first stage. Then we have Kleshagni and Subhada, that it frees one from these anxieties, these sinful reactions. And at the same time, it gives one all good qualities. It gives one a higher taste, for instance. It has different characteristics of Subhada, all auspicious. One of them, it gives it a higher taste than sense gratification. The other is it's attractive to everyone. It is beneficial for everyone. So, it's supposed to give us a higher taste.
Suppose.
Yeah, suppose if we practice it properly. If we actually if we actually spend the time to hear what we're supposed to do, and then at least accept some of it. We may not be able to understand everything or accept everything, but we have to accept something. Otherwise, how can we expect to make any progress?
So on the level of anishtita, unsteady devotional service, which goes through bhajana kriya and up to anartha nivritti. So during that process, happiness should also be there if you are practicing properly.
Yeah, of course. We're not here to torture ourselves. Of course, we have to expect sometimes there won't be complete happiness. Krishna says, yet, what does he say? That which in the beginning, yet tatsukam, yet taragre vishami va pariname ritopamam, tatsukam satikam proktam atmabuddhi prasadajam. That which in the beginning may be bitter like poison, but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So we have to tolerate. Sometimes there may be times in our devotional service where we're not so happy. But if we go on with our devotional service with determination, then we'll become purified, and then we'll realize a higher level of happiness than we did before. So we can expect there's going to be times when we're going to have to learn tolerance. In order to learn tolerance, we have to put in a position where we wouldn't normally be tolerant. In order to learn how to become tolerant, you have to be put in positions where your tolerance is going to be tested. You can't learn tolerance in a position where, you're bathing, where you're in paradise with the most sumptuous food and the most luxurious place to sleep, and everyone's fanning you and glorifying you. That's not the place to learn tolerance. To be put in a position, to be put amongst people where you have to learn to tolerate. That's why our ashram is not crowded. People normally aren't enthusiastic to learn tolerance, to live with people who don't suit their desires, their expectations. So one has to adjust. and tolerate. And therefore one makes spiritual advancement just by living in an ashram. If one is learning tolerance, one is living in the ashram thinking, these people are terrible. I wish that everyone would move out so at least one good devotee would remain here. Me. So tolerance in itself is not sufficient. We have to come to the program too. Chant Hare Krishna together. Then we'll be able to understand why we're tolerating these other devotees, because they're also devotees. And if I learn how to appreciate them and tolerate them, then when they chant Hare Krishna, then Krishna will reveal himself to me.
Maharaj, what is the most common mistake which we neophytes on the Anishtita level dealing with anarthas doing that it preventing that we experience this susukam?
We don't chant our rounds attentively.
Inattention.
Inattention to everything. Not only to, we don't think about what we should actually do. And when we do it, we don't think about how to do it. We don't know what our business is, and we're not asking how our business is. So we only have to do two things. What is our business and how's business?
But isn't it that this inattentiveness is a natural consequence being in the rajas and tamas? Inattention is because we are neophyte, we are influenced by rajas, right? And tamas.
If we want to be. It's a good excuse.
We don't want to be, but we still are.
Yeah, because we want to be. It's like, as I said, you grab a tree and you keep on saying, please let me go, let me go. And someone comes along and says, well, why don't you just let go of the tree? The tree's not holding on to you. No, you don't understand. You're just, dude, tell me something practical. You and your philosophy. No, we're holding on to the modes of ignorance and passion. Mostly because we don't know, most people don't know there's an alternative. Vite vidu swartha gatim Vishnu. They don't know that there's an alternative to obtain Vishnu. Darashya ye bahya arthamanina. Therefore, they're taking insignificant things as something important. But we can always, instead, when our minds are wandering, we can just bring, about different things. We can just say, well, why should I waste my time thinking about this? Why don't I think about Krishna? What do the deities look like? What did I read today? What was the class about? Thinking about something, we can do that. No one's forcing us to think about Maya. Especially when we have the opportunity when we have experience in Krishna consciousness.
Is this the cause of lack of faith or trust?
As Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in Anartha Nivritti, there's so many causes, like, for instance, laziness, artava, even in being distracted, or laziness, or even the absence of that, pati, or just indifference. There's so many causes. And we should know what the causes are and avoid them.
Thank you.
Rasava, taste for material objects, inattentiveness, even with lack of distraction, whatever. But we have to fight it. That's all. That's what we can. It's our desire. When we fight it, then we're increasing our desire. When we fight to remember Krishna, to take shelter of Krishna, then our desire to obtain Krishna will increase, because Krishna will reveal himself to us to that extent, and we'll experience a higher taste.
So to help devotees, we should support them to understand this, so they can follow and so they can progress.
So that's the whole business of giving a class. Now, my dear devotees, please lament, the sky's falling. You're under the modes of ignorance and passion. There's no way out. You're finished. Just surrender to Maya. That's not our business. We can, by hearing about Krishna, we can say, just chant Hare Krishna. You're in difficult, chant Hare Krishna. If you can't do that, then at least, hear about Krishna or see the deities or something. We have so many opportunities to take shelter of Krishna. Pray to the Lord.
Thank you. There is also another sentence caught my attention. Unfortunately, however, because of lack of education and culture, people are victimized by the false happiness of sex life. What is this education and culture? What is here meant under the culture?
Have you ever gone to school?
Also.
What kind of culture and education did they give you? How to become a brahmachari and live austere and chant the holy names 24 hours a day? Was that the education, the culture that you were subjected to in school?
Would be a good idea. It's a good idea. But what is meant here under the culture?
Well, everyone has a culture. You have animal culture, you have human culture, you have so many cultures. Culture is the way people act in society. Here, for instance, is the culture of the mudhas. Just eat, sleep. And then there's the culture of the Naradamas also. We're civilized. We eat, sleep, mate, and defend in a very civilized way. And then there's the Maya Pradhyanas. We have so much knowledge about why we should all be eating, sleeping, mating, defending. We can support it with factual evidence. And then that's culture.
Prabhupada was asked, by a journalist, what do you think about Western culture? And Prabhupada said, it would be a good idea.
That was Gandhi.
Gandhi.
Gandhi was
Gandhi was asked?
Yeah, Gandhi was asked. When Prabhupada was asked in England, what do you think of England? He said, it's hell.
Thank you.
Probably went there in the winter, so it was hell. Anything else? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Once you were mentioning in class that in Chaitanya Charitamrita it says that if we don't properly execute devotional service along with this bhakti lotus seed, also the weeds that we have in our heart that can also grow up. So how can we, is this a process to, by tolerating them, to tolerate our desires and urges of material senses to overcome these weeds?
Well, if we chant Hare Krishna with attention and with some devotion, then the weeds will actually be destroyed. It's not a question of just tolerating them. It's a question of taking shelter of Krishna, so that when Krishna appears in our heart, to whatever extent, then our heart becomes purified of all these anarthas. Burns, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yataidam so samrido ganir, basmat sakru terjana, ganagni sarvakarmani, basmat sakru terjana. As the blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, or Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all the reactions for our previous activities. It's only when we stop paying attention, and we start paying attention to the weeds that they grow. When we stop paying attention to Krishna, pay attention to the weeds, then the weeds will grow. We don't have to do that. We can pay attention to Krishna, and then the weeds will be destroyed. All right, thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.